Hi, welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe so you won't miss a new episode. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted and privileged to have a conversation with Jack Manning Bancroft. Hey, Jack, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Jack, allow me to introduce you briefly to our audience. You are here as the founder and CEO of AIME, the Australian Indigenous Mentoring Experience, which is very much recognized as you've won quite a lot of awards because while founding AIME, like the Australian Human Rights Medal, the GQ Man of Inspiration, the Young Australian of the Year. And you also published a couple of children's books along the way. So again, thank you so much for being here. And we're going to cover how are we going to empower young people. Now, to start off with, first question: when you meet a stranger, how would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'd say I'm Jack, and if they ask what I did, which might be part of the
Yeah.
question, that I work on a network to alleviate inequity, which I've been working on for 20 years. So as you said, we started in Australia,
Yeah.
and then realised that part of the tension and the challenge it isn't actually about trying to alleviate inequity for one child or one group of children. Everything is interlinked, and everything we share as a species with many, many other species. And so in the last decade, the sort of second chapter of my last 20 years of work has been about how we apply more of a systems frame to an intersecting network of people moving from inside and outside the margins to try and shift what we value and where we place value. And fundamentally where intelligence comes from, because I think that first question as to where we source intelligence from often then creates a number of flow-on effects for how we measure success or otherwise, and define what's inside or outside the margins. And there's a number of biases and blind spots in our patterning in that very simple question of where do we source intelligence from. So that'd be my long answer at some dinner party to someone who asked me a question.
Okay. That you've just given me a lot to dive into, but let's start at the beginning. So how did you start this movement? How did you start AIME? What's the reason behind that?
Yeah, the simple answer in one word is guilt.
Guilt?
Guilt. Yeah. So my family is Aboriginal or Indigenous to Australia through my mum's side, and a very, often when you come from a family that has a background that's had a traumatic history, it's then just assumed that you will roll out the tropes of that trauma. So I'll do a little bit of that, but it's not done lightly. So my grandfather, had black skin. I've got fair skin, if you can see the video, and went and fought in World War II for Australia and came back and faced apartheid conditions. And, we've had 200 years of one of the most crazy, oppressive attacks on one of the most intelligent, beautiful systems of human thinking, which is the Indigenous system here, which has been around for 60,000 years. So, yeah, my grandfather lived in a century where we had for 100 years a policy to breed out the black, a policy to take children away from all forms of government, and to try and eradicate through a breeding program the end of Indigenous people in Australia. Before that, there were massacres. Smallpox was brought over on the First Fleet. And more recently, it's, and as part of that narrative in the last couple hundred years, it's a dehumanizing of intelligence, and placing Indigenous people as another and another far beyond, and that I think when I came into the world, my mum grew up as one of two Aboriginal families in a country town called Tenterfield in Australia. There were no stories about being Aboriginal in the school curriculum. She's a visual artist. She's got 1 million children's books in circulation. So that's a pretty good generational shift for stories and being in the mainstream. And I look like I look like, and I got a scholarship to go to university, and they said, why should we give this to you? And they were looking for a fusion of an Indigenous Rhodes Scholar.
Yeah.
Said, look, if you give it to me, I want to put something back, and if I do anything in my life, I'll do something big. So that was at 17. I got the scholarship, and so I talked myself a big game into it. But really, like, I wanted to make sure I could look in the mirror and know that I didn't take my identity and a scholarship for a ride, that I managed to put back at least as much as I got from those opportunities for my ancestors, and for so many people that had less opportunities than I had.
Okay, so the guilt comes from having the opportunities where others did not have that.
Yep.
Okay. Now, okay, I can understand that. Now, AIME at the moment is quite a massive, you could say, endeavor. How do you take the first step? What does that look like?
To where we are now, or a first
No,
step?
the first step was 20 years ago. So you wanted to give something back.
Yeah.
How do you decide how that looks like? Because did you, when this is about mentoring Indigenous children, I can imagine that there are different alternatives you could have thought of. Why did you choose this one, and how did you start?
Yeah, I think the first 2 years at university, it was just asking the question, how do you change the world? So I studied literature, I watched films, I looked up and read books of the heroes on different continents, and tried to find someone that I could philosophically align with. There was Nelson Mandela was probably the greatest hero that I saw, as someone that had been oppressed and could then look at the depth of forgiveness and then try and fuse into a governance system, a scale of shift. So thinking about forgiveness in spite of all of the genuine and absolutely justifiable reasons for anger, trying to find a pathway through anger into forgiveness and then into systemic design. So I then looked at all of the things that were moving people in my generation. A lot of it were commercial organizations that were trading on hope and happiness and selling products. And so I was like, how do I beat those guys? And at that, for the first decade to 15 years, I was quite competitive. I chased elite sport as a younger person. And so it became, how do I beat them at their own game? And then how do I make this caring the coolest thing on campus? That was the first lever. It wasn't about Indigenous kids. And again, back to the beginning, like where we're at now it was quite a significant macro kind of systems change frame that we're looking at. But it's, from the beginning, I was very clear that this wasn't about fixing a problem for Indigenous kids. I didn't buy that premise from the outset. This was a systemic challenge, and we had to work out how to move a group of people who were on borderline never going to trust a mainstream ever again, and a group of people who had then inherited all of this systemic pain that had been caused by their parents and grandparents, who wanted to change something. And then a 20-year phenomenon, which has happened in our generation, of technology just distracting us. And we had probably 20 years of the really gnarly scale up of advertising being commodified with your Nikes and your Jordans, and just suddenly buy, and this crazy sense that was what success was. So I was watching a very distracted generation. I was watching, we were studying journalism at the time, and I was just watching an industry that was about to be hacked apart, and has happened in the last 20 years, and us lose our fourth estate and lose our guides, and our democracies teeter because of it. So they were some of the tectonic plates that were moving around. And when it got to starting, we did two things on campus. Ran a couple of concerts, and then there was this, I sort of looked around, and we had this Indigenous University Games that I was a part of, and it was amazing. There were 200 Indigenous university students, and the story in Australia is that if you're Indigenous, you're born to be an athlete or an actor, or a performer or an artist, which is quite a similar narrative across a number of marginalised communities around the world. Your talents are there in that entertainer playground. And I just thought that was just mythology in terms of patterning story. And I could see these university students, go, okay, well, how do we pattern a different story for these kids that you've got plenty of intelligence? The limitations in my 17, 18, 19-year-old mind was it was still accepting the premise that going to university or getting a job inside the existing system was success. I hadn't seen enough outside of that to go, hang on a minute, maybe you've actually got all the intelligence that you need. We need to be moving the system to you, or moving your design frame. So that was some of the early thinking. How to do it? We just said we were going to do it. So we've kind of looked at this shape, and then this idea for a mentoring program came about when I was looking at these kids and these university students and went, okay, well, maybe it's about a bridge and maybe we can use mentoring. I was studying philosophy at the time, so a lot of the ancient Greek cats, and it's like, this is what's missing, the knowledge transfer. And this is a beautiful bridge for us. And then we looked at Big Brother, Big Sister from the States and like, okay, that's a really important model. And what we wanted to design differently was one that built capacity so everyone was stronger without the need for a mentee or a mentor. So we're actually trying to enliven the system. And so it's more like going to an electric car charge station. You got your boost and then you could drive on and you don't necessarily need to come back. And so that was really important part of the engineering process for us from the beginning. And then I had my eye on scale, like from the get-go, like if this thing worked, how did we scale it across the country? And then once we reached a point, like how do you then scale it around the world?
Okay. You touched on a couple of interesting things. I tried to see if I can explore that one by one. First of all, you mentioned the definition of success. For you, that's not, you could say, buying the latest Nike or going to IKEA, buy whatever you want. So you almost described it as like an epiphany. I realized there's something else which I define success. Two-part question. First of all, how do you define success? But also, how is that a definition you also would like to share, impose, whatever, on the group you want to do it for? Because they still would have that classic definition of success. They still want to buy the Nike shoes.
Yeah, I think there's so what does success look like? Yeah, when you stumble your way behind them doors and receive some awards or whatnot, you realize that the hero's journey is hollow and it doesn't take you to anywhere but the end of an abyss where you're looking at yourself. So success isn't self. Success isn't me. The AIME story and what we've created is come from lots and lots and lots of things and people that have come well before me. And I grabbed a note for a little bit and I'm playing some music with a note, but it's one very long song and there'll be a very long song afterwards. So I just think the mythology and the hyping around the hero and the founder is really, really, really dangerous because it also absconds responsibility from the rest of us. We're like, well, you're excellent, you can go and do all those things. And so I think success is being able to be in relation. And if I'm in relation with humanity and with other species, if I'm in relation with the past, if I'm in relation with the future, I'm in relation with today, then I have a very rich context for being able to access the intelligence around me. And this guy, Alejandro, who works with us, is one of our team, is a magician based out of Costa Rica. He says you have to be awake and aware to the magic. And I think that is success. And the most deeply incredible part of that feeling of peace is you don't actually want or need for anything. And the advertisers that have played the advertising game to make us feel less worthy, like it's a tactic that's been very effective. But I think for our team and for a lot of people that are connected in the network that we're working on, once you have ceremony once you're in relation, the rest falls. You don't need it. And that's what's really challenging when you're in a strong relational network, is you're grounded, you're held by wisdom, and life is really full of amazing gifts of knowledge. And that is, I think, the most unbelievably satisfying meal. And the second part, I think, is that you take that responsibility, and we're not in a time in human history when you can just you can sit with that. We're not in that moment where you can sort of sit calmly for 7 generations. Just doing a podcast. Love you. And I think now requires urgent action and movement. And I think that's attention to how, being in relation traditionally in a lot of our systems and our Indigenous systems back here, we required micro action often, and now we require both micro and macro action. And that's also, I think, a part of being successful, that you don't abscond responsibility to the earth.
Okay. Now, to what extent is this, I would say, your personal definition of success, or is this also the definition of success adopted by AIME and the program?
Yeah, I think I've kind of been like positive feedback loop cycles. Like there's been times where I've tried to grab the notes and help write the story, and then this recent book that's just come out, Hoodie Economics, that I wrote, that had 300 people's hands on it after I'd written 15,000 words, and our team were across it the whole way through, and we were so I was trying to document the work and the thinking that we were navigating and the tension. And, we just came out of a conversation before about contracts and the challenge with building contracts diagonally across borders, and what does that look like, in the commons, and what does that look like in playgrounds where you can move over a longer period of time versus contracts which are fear-based or, protecting the reputation, and often always driven back to whatever cash is. So that, really amazing, rich conversations, which I'm not the author of, I'm just in, and I'm just trying to document it. So I think I'm an okay journalist, and okay at translating. So every year the recycle of the knowledge, like when you're trying to develop a mentoring curriculum, which was the first phase before then trying to build a digital country, is you're asking yourself the question all the time, like, what knowledge do I pass on, in what way and how? And I can only do that by listening to heaps and heaps and heaps of different people, inside, outside, and everywhere around us, and lots of other animals that aren't people as well.
Okay. You triggered on creating a digital nation. I want to come to back about a little bit later, but I also was interested in what you said also way in the beginning, is to have a collective wisdom, to have collective knowledge. What do you mean by that? Is that the storytelling of Indigenous people you're talking about? You all know short stories. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's like, I think it can be quite practical, and pragmatic. It's the richness of the nodes in the network of us being a node. So it's just where we are in our relational context. And so when I think one of the richest parts of the internet in the last, 20, 30 years, the best promise of the internet is we can have really deep, rich, unlikely connections. That's the wonder. We can have a conversation across continents in real time, and a text from that fusion can come together from very, very big lived experience that may not have been likely, definitely wouldn't have been as easy to translate into a text or a tool. So I think when I reflect on that collective intelligence, I think about the relational index of an individual's health. And in our systems, like sort of what we've been trying to translate is, in our Indigenous systems, there's relationships in sort of often in 5 dimensions or multiple time spans. So it's really, are you still holding like people from the past with you, and are you carrying their stories, and are you activating through memory? Are you connected to non-human entities? So our totems are platypus, and the platypus, Janban is the name of the platypus in our language in Bunjalung. And Janban churns the water. And like, until learning that, I was like, man, why am I always trying to like get things moving? But Janban churns the water, and then after the water is churned, the water's actually healthier once it settles. Then the platypus goes away, and that's something I'm trying to learn. Like, how do I know when the time is to stop churning, and then to focus on the engineering, or to sit and to wait, or to go back, and sit in the shade and sit in darkness. And so learning from other species, and then looking to the future and thinking about multiple generations ahead. I think a relational orientation which isn't focused on the nuclear family, preserving wealth, sustaining power, protecting, and defending and keeping everybody out. I don't think that's healthy relational context. I think that's an inheritance from a time of creating wars and division with people at scale to design the way that we have modern nation states. Now, many of us are living in peaceful times, but we still inherited big barriers because we operate in sort of straight lines instead of just going to our neighbour or our neighbour's neighbour or the next street, and letting control go, which I think is quite challenging. When you need to develop a level of emotional and relational competence to be able to be confident to go into places where you are not an expert, and even more fundamentally where you do not know. And I think that is one of the things that happens in strong relational networks. And when you're in relational health, you are often saying, I don't know. And there is no fear that you're going to get hit over the head by a teacher after saying that you just it's safe to say that. And it can come in time, or you may never know.
Actually, that resonates quite well with me. I talk a lot about how to build communities, build business communities, because I sense this change, the shift from a command and control to a connect and collaborate society. Rather than looking at what sets us apart, being in the silo, it's about how can we complement each other, how can we connect, how can we align each other. I mean, I'm hearing you saying that as well. And obviously digital technology helps quite a lot because it allows us to connect on a global level. Which is a nice segue to just wondering to finish off, what are you trying to do with the digital nation, imagination? What's that all about?
Yeah, there's I don't know, like all rich things, like a tree's got about 100 roots to it and lots of things happening at the same time. We've tried to build a big stack where we can have a playground for humanity to come in and to navigate a shift from the transactional to the relational. So that's sort of part number one. So we've got 5 key groups that we're focusing on in the relational economy for the first phase. And that one example, one of the key citizenship groups is organisations who have the chance to then work to become accredited, to become joy corporations. So it's a bit of a traditional accreditation pathway is one of the economies. So people are coming in and they're going through an accreditation journey. We've got schools that are going to be working to be established as imagination labs. We're looking to unearth 1,000 to 10,000 Indigenous knowledge systems labs to take our knowledge from the sort of cultural artefact story playground to the systems design playground and sit alongside Bain and Company and McKinsey and et cetera, et cetera. And then we've got kids who have been pushed outside the margins, and particularly the generation of kids who are stuck screaming and protest around climate change, to look to establish custodial economies and micro-custodial economies. And so that'll be 4 or 5 of the key groups that are in the relational economy. We've then built a systems change lab, and I think that one might feel a little bit like an MIT Media Labs. The difference, I suppose, to MIT Media Labs, which has been one of the places we've looked to for inspiration, is MIT Media Labs did the Unlikely Connections mashup of the faculties of engineering and arts and business sort of coming together. We're bringing in the faculties of joy, of kindness, of imagination, of custodianship, of mentoring, and the people that have been excluded way beyond the margins into the centre of a group in that systems design frame. And then we've been working on this number inside the country of unlikely connections of 5 as the key sort of algorithm to create a generative nucleus in parallel to that nuclear family that we've inherited, or our first 5 that we've developed over the course of an adult lifetime or a child's lifetime. So that's sort of some of so we'll have a relational economy, a systems change lab, and then a tool shed where we'll be working on big text. So over the course of the decade, we'll publish 40 books across the areas of mentoring, custodianship, and imagination. And then we'll also publish the case studies of people going on that journey to become joy corporations or establish Indigenous knowledge systems labs. And a little bit like the way you described this podcast before we jumped on, Fritz, like I'm more interested in what we call failure time, which has been a lesson that we've taught our methodology with the kids with. Like, tell us about the grit, about the stuff that didn't work, about the real challenges in the build, because if we just see the shiny person be like, ta-da, then we don't learn anything from the process.
It's always a bumpy ride. and a good friend of mine, he set up the Institute of Brilliant Failures. And
Great.
realizing how much you can learn from the mistakes you're making because you're actually allowing others to learn and avoid mistakes to be made. So there's a lot of brilliance in sometimes getting it wrong. And I just wondering, what are the biggest learnings or failures you've made and overcome?
Control is the simplest one, I think. Fear of reputation, fear of my own reputational damage. So holding on to control, wanting to be liked, like from being a little kid, and then being in leadership to be like, oh, okay, I've got to get it right. And then being able to not swing a pendulum, then to just apathy, which is just a cop out from leadership. Like, what a great manager, let's just do anything. To then go from command, control, reputation, strategy, container, to then genuinely trying to look at biomimicry and mycelium and the intelligence of nature and our Indigenous systems, and to try and build complexity from breaking a structure that in every space for the first decade I was getting all the awards and getting all the feedback that says this is right, and I could feel in my soul that we were not shifting anything fundamentally because it was fitting into a container of a system that wasn't as healthy in relational context as it could be. So yeah, I think I've learned that
Jack, am I hearing that those rewards actually held you back because they put you in a particular context of how they want to see the world? So hey, I can understand.
Yeah, I think you put into, well, you've got to trade on them, right? It's all this delicate tightrope over a 20-year period to get to a place where you might actually be able to change something at scale. So you've got to trade on, all right, yeah, here's this youngest person to get an honorary doctorate thing gets me a meeting with someone else, and then the meeting with someone else doesn't actually even, that person, 10% of them wants to change something, but the 90% of them really wants a status quo. So they give you a 10% shot to move something a little bit, and then you move around, and so you're always trying to pull these threads to hold on to a symphony. And yeah, I think being able to be in a space now where I just want to do the work, I just want to put my head down and do the design work and work with beautiful people like that. I just would love to not have to dance so much. And those awards and those things can get you into a place where you're I never wanted them, but I knew that they were leverage in a certain system, but hoping to get to a place where you can kind of just do the work.
Okay. Hey, good insight what a reward actually also forces you to do, but that's still, you have to realize you have to have your own metrics of success and your own North Star. How you're going to get there is so different, but this could be a distraction. That's what I'm hearing you say as well.
Yeah, and it's just an empty promise. I think that's the most disappointing thing about external recognition. Relational health and being able to look at each other and go, oh,
yeah,
we shared an energy current. That's you can't put that into a trophy. But when you feel that vibration that you're onto something special, or you're cracking something, or that, and that something moves. You're like, whoa, that was cool. But that's it. That's the moment.
Hey, Jack, you've touched upon so many topics which I'd like to explore, maybe for a second podcast. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Maybe one last question then. Do you see yourself doing this the rest of your life? Is this how you also want the world to remember you? Or is there going to be a particular point in your future where you say, okay, look, I've done my part, I'm going to move on?
Yeah, we've got a very simple answer for that. We've set an intentional death date for AIME and for Imagination 10 years from now. So the clock's already started ticking. It's the first organisation in Australia to have an intentional death date written into its constitution. And we intentionally wanted to use that language because nature dies and lives really healthily. And if we can build our vocabulary around death, we can understand that if we're in a non-profit sector and we're trying to work on a campaign for change, to know that I will have done 30 years by the time that's happened, and that'll be enough. I might, I've got an active mind. I'll be curious, I'll be open to what's in the world, but I definitely know hand on heart that I will be able to go, yeah, that that was enough. And what happens after that becomes like a interesting, it'll be and I want to, if I can be helpful, cool. But I also know how much of a lift this has been and will be for 30 odd years. So yeah, I'm really hopeful in the next decade, once Imagination's Up, which comes out in sort of October this year, that I can just be a bit of a gardener and hang out with beautiful people and just learn and just there'll be really important, serious work for us to do, but I want to try and hover in that joy space amongst the tough engineering and the challenges we have to solve and find a way. So 10 years, brother, like death date.
Okay. That's very much a lesson learned. Hey, last question then. Would your advice be to young people when they start off their own journey?
That your life is going to be like being a conductor of 150 train lines that are moving in loops and moving underground and moving right and moving straight. And sometimes they're going to be on time and sometimes they're going to be completely out of control. Sometimes you're going to have to fix some train tracks, and it's not going to be as simple as one train coming or going. You're not right or wrong or good or bad or smart or dumb or pretty or ugly. You are in this tiny little skin suit for a short amount of time, and life's going to move around you and you're going to move around it. And sometimes you'll feel like you've got it sorted, and other times you'll have no idea, but you can only ever be wherever you are at that moment, and that you're more than enough. And any organization, any person, anybody that makes you feel less worthy than who you are, where you are, is someone and something that you should be trying to think about how to turn that train off the tracks and focus on another train.
Hey, Jack, thank you so much for your time, your insights. Wish you lots of success in setting up Imagination. And interesting to watch what's going to happen in 10 years' time. But for now, thank you for your time so much. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.